Welcome, everyone. I'm the chair of the APRALO Policy Forum, and I had the distinct pleasure of introducing this pilot cross-RALO collaboration with EURALO. Very happy to see this come to fruition. And I'm glad to see that many people are joining us as well, and I'm pretty sure that more people will log in as we go on. But today's topic is on trusted notifiers, and the rationale for selecting this particular topic is we have recently in the at large been discussing a number of aspects of DNS abuse mitigation, right? And one of it is to see whether there are entities or networks out there that we could potentially partner with as the at large community in the interest of individual end users, and basically to see if there's anything that we as a community or individual persons can do to support these kind of efforts in terms of trusted notifiers to help with DNS abuse mitigation. And obviously, when we talk about DNS abuse, we do have a definition in ICANN speak on what we mean by DNS abuse. But I'm going to go out on a limb here today and facilitate discussions on other online abuses. So we're not going to be necessarily limiting ourselves to DNS abuse as defined by ICANN. I think it's also important for communities and individual end users to find out and to learn about other efforts that also try to combat online abuse. Okay. So with that, thank you very much again for joining us, and I will hand the mic over to my colleague from EURALO, Frederic Taes.
Thank you very much, Justine. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited by this pilot to have a webinar between Asia Pacific and Europe. So really to bring the best experts to you around the topic. Thank you for the initiative, Justine. And from the EURALO side, we have gathered many experts, also from outside the ICANN world, but internet-related world, with Oleksandr Honcharenko from AXGHouse and from Estonia. We have also then a presentation because he is from a trusted notifier, but also a trusted flagger in the terms of the European Union. And afterwards, and Janssen from Petillion Law from Belgium will explain the difference between the ICANN approach and European Union. Afterwards, we'll have also the trusted notifier network with two good speakers, Alban, Kwan, and Chan, who will present or make a wonderful presentation. And afterwards, I'm sure you will have a lot of questions. And we have then two very good Steinar Grøtterød, who is our DNS abuse expert in Europe, in broader Europe, and Justine, you just met. And then afterwards, we will end with a smaller wrap-up. So I'm wishing you a pleasant meeting, and starting now with Oleksandr Honcharenko from AXGHouse and Removee. Oleksandr, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oleksandr Honcharenko. That I'm appreciate invite for this meeting. That's pleasure for me to introduce myself and my company. I'm digital enforcement expert from AXGHouse. Our company trusted reported for Google, Microsoft, Cloudflare. Also, we official EU DCA trusted flag. I want to talk about bringing the gap practitioners' view on DNS abuse and trusted notifiers. First, I want to say that 99% of our reports is copyright. That's why we skip registrars, because in relation to copyright, they are slow, and we contact hosting providers in 99% of our work. We see some risk here because without way of talk to registrars, bad domains still live so long, and they rotate in hosting providers and remain alive for a long time. What is bad domain? This means these websites who breaks the law after receiving hundreds or even thousands complaints. Next, I want to introduce some cases which we have recently about type squatting and brand impersonation. First is Estonian software brand Retouch4me, malicious website which was taken down, and madapes.net, it's also taken down after report to registrars. I want to say that cooperation with registrars is working in this case, and it's fine. Next case is SMS fraud. When we protecting copyright of our clients, we scanning and reporting unauthorized pirate movies, series. Sometimes we found fake websites who asking for SMS and trick users into losing money. Such websites we also report into domain registrars. In some cases they are taken down, otherwise not. And then we report to hosting providers and delete them from Google and Bing search results. Also, we have our second project is called Removee. It's the platform where every user from every country may submit copyright infringing link or impersonation profile from social media, see average removal time, and remove it. As a trusted organization, we have much faster reporting way, and every single user around the globe may submit, and we will report it on behalf to give faster result. Also, I want to say that we almost finished the second version, which because first version is paid, it's starting from €9 per link, but second version will have free credits. So it will be absolutely free for every single user to remove, for personal use, to remove 10 copyright infringing links or 1 impersonation account per month. Also, it will include free community, so everyone will be able to communicate with each other, and we believe it will add something to market for digital safety. Next is, I want to say that we should work together in this area, because we have lots of, in AXGHouse, we doing monitoring, scanning, and reporting. We have too many cases. We found almost 1 million infringing links per month. Also, we have Removee, where simple users around the globe reporting copyright infringing links, impersonation, and we have many websites who break the law and living many years changing hosting providers, but we see here some gap that domain registrars may connect in this case and cooperate with us better to shut down such domains who infringing copyright, impersonation, fraud. Not only one attempt, but it has many complaints, hundreds or thousands. In this case, I think it will be great field to cooperate. That's it from me. Thank you for your time.
Well done, Oleksandr. Very big thank you to you. I see different applause. And I propose then to, after this really concrete and informative side, to go to here Janssen, who will explain the role of trusted notifiers within the ICANN framework and compare with the role of trusted flaggers under the European Union Digital Service Act. And, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Frederic. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the DSA and in particular the trust flaggers within the DSA. But before we move into the trust of flagger notion, I think it's important to illustrate where the DSA comes from and what its actual purpose is. So the DSA, or Digital Service Act, is EU regulation. Regulation means that it is fully harmonized across all EU member states, and there is no need to have national legislation implement this body of law. The DSA is an instrument to tackle online abuse with various actors of the internet, and how that is done, we will dig into that in a minute. But what's important to understand is that there's a distinction under EU law between vertical and horizontal instruments. A vertical instrument is an instrument where a private entity needs to address one of the member states to obtain relief. With a horizontal instrument, private entities can invoke the legislation against other private entities. Here, it would be the internet user or a harmed party by an action on the internet towards players on the internet world. So you can directly invoke this instrument and make use of what protection mechanisms are given there. This instrument seeks to balance fundamental rights online and the protection of users from illegal and harmful content. To make that a bit more concrete, you have on the one hand, for instance, freedom of speech rights versus hate speech that can be harmful to people. And you need to balance those rights. Another example would be the protection of copyright or the protection of trademarks online versus similar rights of free speech. For instance, if you have criticism on a certain online experience, to what extent is the criticism allowed, or to what extent are you really making abuse of a mark for other purposes than purely criticism? It is not in a vacuum that this instrument exists. It exists next to other instruments, other intermediary liability rules that can be a bit nation-specific as well. But the purpose is really to have an instrument that is uniform across the EU and that is easy to manage. How does the DSA operate? It uses a tiered approach, and I've made a small diagram here. You have the online intermediaries, which you easily qualify as if you do pure conduit of information. If you are providing any services on the internet, registrars and registries would fall also under that definition. Then there are a set of rules that apply to intermediaries, but they will apply to every player on the internet. Then there are the hosting services. The hosting services, they will need to apply to another subset of additional rules. Then you have the online platforms, and then finally the VLOPs and VLOSes, which are very large online platforms and search engines. There are 17 entities that are today recognized as a very large online platform. It is a platform that generates users in excess of 45 million per month. So think of an Alibaba Express, of an Amazon platform, Twitter, but also there you can be a non-for-profit like Wikipedia, but Wikipedia also qualifies as a very large online platform. Very large online search engines to date, there are only two, that is Google and Bing. These need to comply with the strictest rules of the DSA. I have listed the different rules here. We will not dig into the detail, but I've highlighted the trusted flagger obligations. And we see that the trusted flagger obligations, they only apply to those very large online platforms and search engines, and also to the other platforms. So you will need to qualify as a platform to really need to be in a need to implement the regulations regarding trusted flaggers. That is, for them, it's an obligation. It doesn't mean that others can also not voluntarily implement rules on trusted flaggers and that can be a positive thing to increase your credibility on the internet and to offer more consumer protection, which could improve your status as a trusted party as well. While for a registry and a registrar, for instance, it would not be mandatory to implement regulations on trusted flaggers, they could do so voluntarily. So what is a trust flagger under the DSA? I think a picture says more than 1,000 words. So I have here a picture here of a flag with a shark at the coast. If somebody is trusted there, I think nobody would go into that sea and do some surfing if there is a trusted party warning you about sharks there. The same should become reality with the DSA, that when you have a trusted flagger that is noticing the existence of illegal content online, that these notices are dealt with priority and are taken down if everything is there. Then the biggest question is, okay, how can you obtain a trusted flagger status? Who can be a trusted flagger? There is a requirement of being based in the EU to become a trusted flagger, but where in the EU is irrelevant. You can choose your country of preference, and if you are accepted as a trusted flagger by the competent authorities in the member state, then you will become a trusted flagger able to address abuse from anywhere and really affects EU-wide. Not every entity will become one. You will need to demonstrate your expertise and competence in detecting, identifying, and notifying illegal content online. You'll need to show that you're independent and that you operate with diligence, accuracy, and objectivity. What types of entities have become trusted flaggers in the EU so far? I'm not going to list them all because the list is really long, but you can think of companies that have experience in dealing with child abuse and combating child abuse, I must say, but also companies that deal with intellectual property. For instance, there's an entity in France that is really active in that got accepted as a trusted flagger. Brein, which means brain, is also a Dutch entity that is into the world of copyright protection. They're also a trusted flagger. And so when a trusted flagger raises an issue with an online platform, the way of getting the information down is much quicker. So I think that gives you a small overview of what a trusted flagger is, of how the DSA operates. But if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them, time permitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this presentation, highlighting the view also from legislation in Europe. Well done. And we will continue now with Trusted Notifier Network with Alban, Kwan, and Honcharenko. I don't know who will start the first, but it's about Trusted Notifier Partnership for combating online abuse in APAC region, so in Asia Pacific and beyond, as you are also present in UK, in broader Europe.
Thank you very much for allowing us to present Trusted Notifier Network, or in short, TNN. I mainly travel within the APAC region, and I have Henry here, who is the Director of Product and Strategic Partnership for TNN. He's based in London, so we have both APAC and European presence. Because I think that a lot of people know us at the moment. So let me quickly just give you an introduction. I have been working in the internet industry for roughly about 18 years, and have always been working in a commercial side with a company called CSC, handling the APAC region. So we have a chance to work as a registrar and as a takedown service provider, and we interact with a lot of the internet platforms and registrar community representing the brand as well. So we got a chance to see the problems of online abuse from various different perspectives. And Henry used to work in HAIRC and then CSC with me together in Hong Kong, and work in Nominet when he moved to UK. So we both share a really similar view, as in we trying to understand the problem of abuse from various different angles. When I resigned from the company and established this Trusted Notifier Network as a non-profit organization, we try to find a way to balance all the perspective, so we're not really blaming each other for all the abuse that we still see, but trying to find a way how we can actually align the commercial interests of everyone, so we can actually work together and trust each other. This is what we try to do in a nutshell. TNN is a non-profit, but still we would probably describe it as a social enterprise. We cannot distribute any income. We have to reinvest any money, but we want to build some kind of financial model behind it so it can be sustainable as well. I won't be going through a lot of the policy TNN, but I want to highlight a couple of points of key concept of TNN, because when the previous two speakers talk about the European situation, especially with trusted flagger and stuff like that, the concepts are really similar in some sense, but also different, because what we're trying to say is that because DSA is EU law for sure, But the problem that we see on the internet by nature, a global problem, including Asia Pac region and African region and stuff like that. So we need to find a way where we can also implement some of these concepts, which are essentially really good across the world as well and across multiple industry. So let me focus on three kind of concepts, and I want to go into some of the problem that may be helpful for the EURALO's community as well. Throughout these few months, we have been building a lot of cooperation. This is just a slide actually released by Global Cyber Alliance, and we have a cooperation with them, and they are able to understand what we're doing and kind of map it into the whole ecosystem at the moment. Just to clarify one thing first. So a trusted notifier is mainly a term used in the domain name industry at the moment. Certainly when it especially move into the internet platform side of things, especially in EU, we use the term trusted flagger. Sometimes we call it trusted reporter. I think a lot of the time these terms are interchangeable. So one of the things I want to highlight, because this is EURALO's communities, one of the dilemma that I see from the more civil society and user perspective is that I don't think we have a position at the moment of how we actually think about all the online abuses. In one hand, we want the society to be able to free from the phishing and scam and all the harms. But in the other hand, we also see that content is really important to protect. So we don't want content to be police. We also want the platforms to be more liable to remove harm. At least a subset of the society would hold this particular view. On the other hand, some also from the civil society may hold the view that the platform holds too much power to control speech. At the same time, what would we actually want the platforms to do? There's a view that government should regulate online abuse. But also from a multi-stakeholder perspective, we also don't want government to be the regulator, especially when it comes to internet as well. So what I see is that there are a lot of this conflict, and this kind of conflict also exists in outside of civil society, in the business world, in the platform as well. Everyone are facing a lot of this conflict. So how to actually harmonize a lot of these problems and still find a solution going forward? When we look into, because my background is essentially on the commercial world, when I look into abuse, we want to see this problem slightly differently. I would describe the predominant way how we see online abuses are actually from a lens of what we call social responsibility. So we try to define the liability and responsibility of the platforms and on the notifier and stuff like that. And then we try to ask them to do more, take up more responsibility. But the problem is that responsibility has a cost, right? And we eventually face limit. And it might be better if we can change our thinking and starting to see the problem as something that we describe as a unfair cost transfer problem. So let me just quickly describe what I mean by that. When a phisher create a phishing attack, it actually create a cost that pass on to the brands through their illegal action. And that cost may come in form of the reputation loss, the actual financial loss, or even the cost in buying a brand protection services and stuff like that. A lot of the time, brands doesn't have the internal resources or the expertise to deal with the problem directly. So they would basically pass on this cost and transfer this cost to takedown service provider, who are typically the notifier or the flaggers. So these flaggers or reporters, they're professional in doing so. The problem that we're starting to see is because of AI and the advent of all the automation, and these service providers also have their own costs, right? Because they aggregate a lot of brands requests, and they have to deal with maybe thousands of cases per day. So what they keep doing is that they are templating all the takedowns through AI, and sometimes because their commercial interests align with the customer, the internet platform understand that they will push through some gray areas as well. Because if my biggest customer asks me to take down something, although I know that this is gray area, is it infringement? Is it really abusive? It is hard to say. There's no harm for me to just push it through as well. Internet intermediary as a whole knows that we cannot trust them. So it is up to them to really spend a lot of money to build up their own trust and safety or platform governance team. Now, and this become a really large cost for them. Even if we jump outside ICANN, when you talk about Alibaba and the online platforms and stuff like that, some of the very large ones would be employing hundreds of employees to deal with this problem on a daily basis. So what they can do, they have their own costs. What they're trying to do now is that they're trying to unify processes, they're trying to tighten policy, they demand higher evidence and stuff like that, because and that's natural. If we think about responsibility and liability, they want to reduce their liability and responsibility as well, so their costs will reduce. So because the policy are continue to be tightened, eventually a lot of the gray areas, some of the scams and stuff like that are not being effectively mitigated. So the problem is that the cost effectively transfer back into the brand owners and into the wider society. And then we see basically the government starting to observe this is a problem, and then they're starting to regulate. So we are in this kind of cycle at the moment because we are not thinking about the fundamental of the economic, which is cost. If we are able to somehow reverse the costs, then we would be able to deal with the problem more appropriately. A lot of the costs are concentrated and transferred over to the internet intermediary, the registry, registrar, online platforms, and hosting service provider at the moment. So we are seeing the cost concentration is unfair to ask all the platforms to bear all the liabilities and the costs. If we're able to find a way, and TNN is to do this, is to reverse that cost transfer in some fashion, and we redistribute the cost in a fairer way, then we are going to see the problem will be resolved more from a fundamental basis. Now, this is the first key concept of TNN. The second key concept is actually, I changed the term to be rebuilding Section 230, protection liability stakeholders. Now, and what I mean is that, at the moment, what we see is that the corporate, the victim, they engage a service provider, and the internet intermediary, who are actually responsible for removing the infringement, are actually facing problem from every single people, because they have a lot more liability imposed to them from above, the DSA, the MCA, or Non-Safety Act, and many other laws. And we have the liability from below with the civil society and their own customer kind of holding them liable for wrongful removal. And on the other hand, you have the government, the REA, and the service provider requesting all the intermediary to expedite the takedown and stuff like that. But they are bearing the liability, because if they do it wrong, they, not everywhere have the safe harbor or the Section 230 kind of protection. In Asia, a lot of the countries just doesn't have that. They know that they're not fully protected, so they tend to be really careful about takedown. And if what we want to do is to somehow build what we call an indemnity chain all the way through to the intermediary, so they are protected by contract and have indemnity when they act according to a trusted source and able to expedite that takedown. Now, the third one would be what we call cross-industry cooperation. When we think about, especially in the EURALO community, in the ICANN community, we typically are covering all the DNS abuse, but DNS abuse is a thin technical layer, only cover predefined types of abuses, and a lot of the other types are actually producing real harm for the society and the community as well, like illegal gambling, fraud and scam and stuff like that. We need to find a way to cover everything. And this is very important, because if we think about internet intermediary, and if it's only ICANN community, we can never deal with the real problem. We have to get the hosting service provider involved. We have to get the social media platform involved, the telcos involved, and stuff like that, and also do it in a way that is global and not limited to a certain geographic area, so that all the problem can be resolved. And especially from a geographic perspective, you know how the phishing tag works. If they are focusing on phishing another one particular country, they're most likely going to do that outside of that country, so that they are not going to get into all the law enforcement trouble. So cross-regional, cross-country cooperation and cross-industry cooperation would be quite important. Now, in a nutshell, how it works is that when a brand or a victim detect by one of the abuses detected by the service provider or by themselves, it needs to be verified by the algorithm, because they are ultimately the only one that can actually say this is a fake website or not a reseller of mine creating a new website or something like that. So they verify it, and through that verification came the indemnity, because they are the one who say this is it. So they indemnify the service provider indemnify TNN, and we indemnify the internet intermediary. If we also accept LEA to be joining the network as well, and the reason is because we want to build up that kind of multi-stakeholder network for the law enforcement to come in. If they have a way to actually reduce the harm with doing the top-down enforcement, it will be much better arrangement. So whatever we collect, we will also have the own system to standardize and codify and go through a monitoring and human review to make sure that is comply with what we want and do some measurement as well. And then we send it to the internet intermediary. What internet intermediary needs to do is exactly what DSA written down, basically just a green channel, just an expedited review. We don't mandate a particular response, but what we hope to see is that because we have a network of internet intermediary and a network of trusted notifier who qualify, and we eventually we're going to see a reduction of costs from the internet intermediaries, because some of the work can be transferred downwards, and then we can benefit the notifier because they enjoy a much bigger green channel by acting in a correct way and in a trustworthy way, and then ultimately benefits the brands and also the society because the harm are effectively removed. How TNN may impact the EURALOs and how you could help. First of all, go back into that dilemma that I mentioned. Now, what do we hope to see is that the phishing and scam should be removed as soon as possible. I would give a take over that, because that's what we try to achieve. We want to create a situation where all the harms, regardless of or whether this is strictly DNS abuse or not, it can be removed more quickly. Content should not be policed, because we only verify harm will be removed. We don't accept any political or freedom of speech related issue. Only actual harm as defined by the community will be processed. Platforms should be liable to remove the harm, I would take as well, because they are contractually liable to expedite verify harm. But that's the requirement that that's the only requirement that we put onto the internet intermediary, is that you have to do it quicker. Contractually, through the MOU, they need to help with that. And the other one, with platform holds too much power to control speech. We hope to remove some of this problem as well, because it's not done by a single commercial entity. At the moment, if you post something to Facebook and ask Facebook to remove, it's entirely a single commercial entity responsible for that. If that actually somehow get pushed on to a multi-stakeholder model to deliberate what could and could not be done, it would be a better situation. I think we're not going to take over the commercial entity decision, but at least the deliberation done more in a multi-stakeholder way. The government involvement is also part of what we try to improve as well, because we want to get the LEA and government involved in TNN. They are part of the trusted notifier. We don't have any qualification, because we will also check that. So if we have a better way for them to process it through a multi-stakeholder model that remove the need for them to directly mandate certain content to be removed. So I think this is a better model to moderate content in general. So the last slide I have is how EURALOs could help. I would say that maybe you can introduce some of the LEA that you think, hey, maybe this LEA in your local area would like to participate in TNN. There's no cost for them to join. And the second one is, at the moment, we have 3 defined trusted notifier that we accept, but not civil society. Should we accept civil society organization as trusted notifier? If yes, then not every civil society should be accepted, because they're supposed to be trusted notifier. They need to satisfy certain policy that I haven't got time to go through. But tailor for civil society, what should be the criteria then? You can certainly give us some recommendation of if you think they should be involved and accredited, then how? The last one would be CCTLD. We are talking to a number of CCTLD in the Asia-Pac region. We hope that CCTLD will also join as well because of that global problem that we described. So if you have CCTLD or a link to a CCTLD who you think might be interested in joining a global initiative like this, it would be nice if you can let us know. That's basically it. So if you have any questions, Henry and I will be here and we can jointly answer some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alban, for this presentation. So good transition. You are talking about the questions, and we enter now in the question and answer debate, and moderated by Justine that already presented herself in this meeting, and also Steinar Grøtterød. You are a member, past board member, and from Norway. Maybe you can introduce yourself, Steinar, and then Steinar and Justine, the floor is yours for the question and answers, and also with participation of the public. Steinar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederic. I would like to say I do have some experience in this because I have worked with the internet since the mid-90s as an ISP, internet service provider, as an ICANN accredited registrar, and also as a registry operator for a generic top level. And lately, before I stepped down, is working with a company that developed the tools for identifying and reporting DNS abuse for the ICANN contracted party, that is registry operators and registrars. But now I wear my end user, my EURALO hat on. I find this webinar extremely interesting. I do sense is a little bit focused on brand protection and intellectual property protection, but that is also something that we as end user will experience, and we will also notice bad behavior on the net. I have a couple of questions that I noted through the presentation, but I think I actually will start with a question that was raised by Holy. I'm sorry, Holereish, maybe I pronounced that last name incorrectly, to Alban and the TNN. And there's, what is the harm for end users what's the cost for end users on the harm, and how is actually harm being defined? Is it? Yeah, that's up to you to answer. I'm definitely looking for that.
Maybe let me take this, and Henry, you can chime in as well to supplement your view. In my perspective, that when we also think about harm in a really broad way, we are deliberately staying outside of DNS abuse definition, because in my own work experience, it's really hard to define some of the situation as well. But in terms of harm, I think those that are relevant to end users can also be broadly categorized in two categories. One would be that it is using a particular commercial organization as a proxy for the phishing attack or the scam. The other type would be not having a particular commercial organization. So the first type would quite simply be people pretending to the bank and then try to phish you or scam you, right? The second type would be like a romance scam or something like that. Now, the TNN model is really geared towards the types that are commercially driven. So they're pretending to be a commercial organization because we can then go to that commercial organization to verify whether this is from you or they pretending to be you. Now, then trust and verification can be established. If we're talking about like a scam, like a romance scam, how we handle this is that we basically just rely upon the LEA, and we hope there will be a lot more LEA to join. Then we treat the LEA as the authority to judge this particular romance scam is actually a romance scam. We can't tell, and we want to build a situation where the internet intermediary do not need to make that judgment as well, because no one in the internet intermediary perspective should be able to say definitely this is the harm, and this is a problem that trouble a lot of the internet intermediary, because we are not the judge. We're not the lawyer or the judge, and how do we actually tell? So we want to build a system where the liability of judgment and verification down the chain to the verifier and to those who actually raise the complaint and confirm this is a harm. So that's why we want to build a system with the indemnity as well. We are not liable; they are liable. Whoever say that this is a problem, then they have to bear that responsibility. I hope that gives you some kind of answer. But both parts of the harm we have a way to address. But I would say we would be more effective in mitigating the first type.
Yeah, I think I would just like to add that's also the purpose of us. And thank you very much for the invitation for us to speak with this stakeholder group as well, because we have thought through how do we transfer the cost in the situation there's a commercial interest involved in the abuse management or mitigation, but the harm to the individual users or end user, in fact, came up a lot in discussion that we have had recently with different stakeholders, and people say, oh, what about the end users, and what about people who get involved in the scam, which may not necessarily involve a brand or a enterprise hook, if you like. As Alban has mentioned in the last slide of his presentation, this is actually the point of speaking to you guys. We want to take inputs and get your involvement in this space so that we can build a system. The objective of the TNN is quite simple in a way. We want to facilitate, we want to take away the friction and the duplicated costs in the whole ecosystem when it comes to the abuse management. So happy to take inputs. We acknowledge the potential gaps that we may or may not have in the current setup. That's what the things I want to add here.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I don't see a thumbs up or thumbs down from Holly, but she can signal that in her window. First of all, what I understand is that you have a wider definition of abuse than the ICANN regulated DNS abuse, which is quite interesting to handle worldwide. And but the key question here is, how can end users actually contribute and give data into your system in a way that is reasonable for an end user to handle? I will exemplify that with, there are some systems that because I'm a little bit personally interested in this, I've tried to report things that I know, particularly phishing, and there are some systems that do have this kind of service report when you are being a victim for, or see something that is obviously phishing. But that kind of requires a technical background. Like, first of all, you have to know something. What is phishing? When I have an email from someone that pretends to be my bank account and asks for login details, I don't see why I should do that. That's obviously something that an end user will hopefully will identify as a phishing. But then you come into the pretty nitty stuff about copying the email source, the body, all these kind of things. And that, I guess, 90% of all end users will just have a big question mark. How can I actually do that? So the two questions there. How do you think that end users, maybe in cooperation with the EURALOs, can contribute? And how are you going to simplify this? This is a question for all groups, all presentations, but maybe the TNN network can start answering that, and we pass it on to Jan and Oleksandr later on.
I probably would give my perspective short, so the other panelists can also contribute as well. But from TNN perspective, I think I don't have a good answer for this. It is because when we think about a system trust, we need to be able to know why that particular reporter is trustworthy, and they need to have a certain level of technical know-how and possibly government know-how to make that judgment. So that's why we can trust them. And from that perspective, a general end user would be really hard to do. And I think that returns to the last slide of my presentation. I think maybe TNN also needs to think about fourth type of trusted notifier who are civil society. So if you don't know how to do that, but you have a civil society that might be dealing with certain type of issues, maybe we can rely upon their expertise in that area as a trusted notifier. So we are always be a proxy. All we need to know is whether they have that know-how or not, and then we will be able to help expedite that harm removal. That's how we see things, but we don't have that at the moment because I'm not as familiar with the civil society as I am with the commercial side. But so if you have any recommendation of who can be trusted, or how do we establish an objective evaluation criteria against the various different civil society organizations who can be trusted and who can't, I think this is something that would be meaningful to have a discussion within the EURALO communities.
Thank you very much, Alban. Oleksandr or Jan, you have your mic open. Maybe you can take your answer to these questions from your side.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Steinar. Jan Janssen for the record. I think there is no one solution to the question. And as a victim of online abuse, I think you will need to navigate in terms of what is the harm that you've suffered and who to address it. But I wanted to share a European and maybe even a Belgian perspective on things. When I receive an email that I consider suspicious, there is one action that I always take, and I forward that email to suspicious@safeonweb.be, I think. It's a government initiative. It has to do with the implementation of NIS2. And it's an initiative. They are also a trusted flagger in a way, and they investigate the issue, and they inform all of the ISP on the issue. And so there is a possibility to have that abuse stop. Another thing to do is when it has gone further and you've really been harmed, is always go to the police, to the cybersecurity unit. They will direct you to it, but file a complaint. And then there are some initiatives from civil society, like ethical hackers. Recently, there has been an ethical hacker who was able to identify the real culprits behind the phishing attack through hacking them, and then communicate that information and all of his evidence to the public authorities. So those are some initiatives that you can take. And then there is obviously also what can this community within ICANN do. And there I think there is this working group on the DNS abuse. And so just that you're absolutely correct. The ICANN has a limited definition on DNS abuse, but phishing is definitely in that. And there is currently a working group, which I understand is we can express our voice on what registrars and registry must abide by, how they need to respond to phishing attacks. That when there are usually a lot of registrations are handled by a single entity, that there is an obligation for registrars to, when they take down one site, to go and watch, okay, what other domain names are owned by that entity or related entity. And I see that Justine will address. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was in relation to another question. But anyhow, I think express our voice, express the fact that we are interested in making the internet a safer place, and work in the policy working groups towards that. I think that's really the solution.
Thank you very much, Jan. Actually, before I give the floor to Amrita or Justine, whether I have the power now to rule this, so I do it. I was not aware that the example and the system, the service that you have in Belgium to forward a suspicious email to a certain email address, and then that entity is investigating this. I see in Norway that there's telcos have implemented systems that are stopping the clear cases of phishing, and they are also passing through those with a mark that are in the gray zone, so to speak, and that are services systems that are very user friendly because you don't need the technical expertise. Forwarding an email should be easy in a way. Getting a notifying that this is very suspicious, please take act carefully, or even don't know about this SMS or phone call that you have received because it was already blocked. Oleksandr, I know that you have interesting point in responding to the key questions here, but Amrita has been awaiting and Justine has her hand up. Should we take Amrita and Justine first and then go back to you? Is that okay with you, Oleksandr? Yeah, come on, you're the boss.
Hardly. I was going to address a few points, and then I think Amrina, I suspect I know what Amrina is going to say, and I can hand that portion to her. But I would also invite Oleksandr to chime in if he has a point. What I wanted to highlight was that I don't think we're necessarily looking to trusted notifier networks or trusted flaggers as the be-all and all solution. Okay, I think the purpose of this webinar is just to make people aware of the existence of these entities, what they actually do, and then explore whether there is a role for at-large community and individual end users to tap onto these resources. So clearly the question mark is there. We're still not quite sure how we as individual end user community or even as individual persons can rely on these networks or these trusted flaggers. For example, one question that I had for Jan is, you mentioned trusted flaggers as entities that need to be accredited, if I could put it, by the authorities of EU, right? So do entities include individual persons? I don't know. You can come back in the queue and answer the question. But that kind of questions could be expanded on a little bit further. But also, so Alban talked about the fact that we could participate as maybe a civil society arm, right, to provide feedback to trusted TNN, right, because they might be looking, as he said, to expand to a fourth category of CSOs as trusted notifiers, right? So we could potentially provide input in terms of the criteria that he asked for on how to evaluate entities within the civil society area to become trusted notifiers. So that's definitely something that we can look into from the APAC side of things, as before, EURALO obviously and Europe obviously. And there is also this angle about the fact that we also take it upon ourselves, the responsibility of educating end users, right? And we have started certain initiatives. So for example, the phishing course that I will leave to Amrita to explain, because she's the chair of that working group that's working on that. But I also wanted to address Holly's question about questioning the definition of DNS abuse, right? So this is something that I talked about in the webinar on the overview of DNS abuse mitigation, a possible aspect of, would it be possible for the at-large to try and evolve the definition of DNS abuse? How would we do that? Because we have accepted the fact that in terms of regulating, or at least ICANN being able to enforce certain things, right? They need a working definition of DNS abuse in order to make it legally enforceable, is in the contracts and so forth, right? So they have put that down already. So that's a step forward, right? They've actually identified 5 things as DNS abuse, right? In order to be able to legally enforce the contractual obligations of the contracted parties to deal with those 5 things. But we are always of the position that is not a be-all and all definition. There's always room to improve it and expand, because the types of abuse that goes on, and it's just evolving anyway, right? So the question is, how do we make that evolution happen as an at-large community? So I'm going to stop here and hand to Rita, who's next in the queue anyway. Thanks.
Thanks, Justine. Thanks. I'll definitely speak about the phishing course, but just to respond to you, Alban, as Justine and you mentioned, this is very specific and only few people can become a trusted notifier at this point of time, and I'm sure you all will evolve. But if I look at a similar thing, which is a fact-checking network, which you have on content, normally they have a set of criteria based on which anyone can apply. If they fulfill those criteria, they can become a fact-checking member of the fact-checking network who can give updates, etc. So similar things could happen. I'm sure you would be doing in a trusted notifiers also, where even civil society organizations who may be equipped or working in those areas could actually become one of your trusted notifiers. So this is a very specialized things which people could do. But in terms of best practices, different economies have different ways in which they are dealing with frauds. Perhaps for TNNs, it may be good in some places to get in with telecom regulator who are actually looking at all the scam, etc., which I understand you don't want to get in heavily into. I'm sure you would be evolving your processes in that manner. I completely agree with Justine that having a proper definition of domain name abuse is important, but at least from the end user perspective and us, what we can do is educate the community on what is phishing, what is scam, how to prevent oneself, and where to submit these complaints. Sometimes it's the police, sometimes it's the local website, etc. I think the resolution methods is important and how to get that resolution within jurisdiction. So as Justine mentioned, we do have a phishing module which the at-large community has prepared. We've done a few pilots across certain jurisdictions, Africa, some parts of Latin America, etc. We would be rolling it out soon. We are having our first round of EURALO leads who would be participating in the training, and they in turn would be encouraging our at-large members, individual members, community members, etc., to impart this program, this capacity building to various sections of the people. Obviously, it's going to evolve. This is just the starting. It can have different flavors. What I feel is perhaps when we evolve this course, having trust notifiers or others giving their inputs so that practical aspects can be included in the course or examples, those would be helpful, as in what are the cases which could be highlighted, what is it we should add into our courses in future, etc. Those are some places where I see clear collaboration at this point of time without having because there are different aspects in which you work. But I'll stop at this point of time, and we'll definitely be happy to share our phishing module with all of you too. Thanks.
I think I would like to have Ola Bimbe coming first, and then Oleksandr, if we have the time. We're definitely running out of it. But while they are talking, please pay attention to the polls on your screen and answer them as you want. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning from Nigeria. My question is to the first presenter. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty pronouncing his name, and I wish I could. He mentioned during his presentation that the organization have communities where conversations can come off as regards to DNS abuse, confrontation, or handling. So I was asking in the chat, you didn't see my question, are individual end users allowed to be part of these communities? And if they are, how can we join? Or how can I join? Sorry.
Oleksandr,
Thank
please answer that one.
Hello, my name is Oleksandr. The question about, could you please clarify, is this question regarding Removee, which I mentioned we're planning to introduce soon second version with community?
Yes, please. I didn't quite get that, whether it's an existing community or you are planning to have it. But I know you said there's going to be, you guys are having, it's like something like there is going to be, or there really is an existing community where people can come together, talks about observation of DNS abuse and how to mitigate it, how to undo it.
All right, thank you for your question. First of all, let me highlight that we trusted Flagger in relation to intellectual property and privacy. DNS abuse is more related to phishing, scam, and in our Removee platform, currently, end user can report only copyright or impersonation. But in second version, we planning to make it free 10 free credit for every user, and every end user may report, first of all, verify infringing content, see average removal time for copyright infringement and impersonation. Maybe in version 3, we will implement same for privacy, for scam and phishing. End user who see scam, they will be able to report, to verify this and report with us. In relation to community, yes, it's correct. We already about to launch second version with community. Removee will include free community where users can discuss all questions related to copyright, intellectual property, any questions related to internet removals. It will be absolutely for free, but it will be soon, maybe in 1 month. We about to finish it. I hope I replied to your question. If not, please clarify. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we are past the scheduled time. Justine, Frederic, you want to wrap up this? And thank you very much for everyone asking questions and a fruitful discussion.
Over to Frederic. I think he's listed as the wrap up.
Yes. Frederic speaking. Thank you very much. It was really so much enthusiasm, so many questions. So this meeting, this webinar is only a start point about the trusted notifier topic. We addressed a multi-stakeholder and we had a real multi-stakeholder here webinar. It was good to address abuse, but also cost. What is the cost and how it is spread, the cost of the abuse, and what is the role of the end users. With questions we will also address to EURALO and APRALO communities afterwards. So I will not take more time. So to be continued for sure. And this meeting is recorded, available to anyone. And we will discuss that for sure in ICANN in Sevilla in June and in other further meeting. And also very shortly in our EURALO monthly member meeting shortly. And I guess is the same in Asia Pacific region. So thank you very much, everyone. All the speakers, Oleksandr, Steinar, excellent moderation, Justine, also Henry and Alban and Jan, you all made a really great job. Also big thanks to the interpreters and the ICANN staff for the global organization. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good night. See you. Bye.